There's a man named Balthazar, and he is a turd burglar. Let me back up. I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 lately, which is amazing RPG, but huge, so I have to take these breaks. It has a post-coital phase to it, where I'm convalescing until I go back in. And on this most recent sojourn through BG3, I encountered a necromancer, an undead necromancer named Balthazar. If you know of this man, maybe your blood pressure spiked like mine did when I realized there was no way forward and that I had to defeat said turd burglar. The problem with necromancers is they're like the Soviet Union at war. It's a numbers game, overwhelming the enemy not with quality of firepower, but sheer volume. And necromancers can bring to bear a ton of low-level guys, a trash mob. And I don't like that. I like fighting a relatively small party and really just matching in terms of skill, having that parity there, and just seeing who comes out on top. But like I said, no way forward. What you gonna do? So I fight the Balthazar, and like it's a Souls game, I get hosed. He is pounding me into the trenches. Mud, blood, and beer. I take him on, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 times. I'm not a masochist, though. I won't fight millennia 200 times over the course of 9 hours. What I do is see if I've got the goods, and if I don't, I resort to the time-honored tradition that is seeking out the Reddit thread. How do I beat Balthazar? And according to the internets, you gotta min-max. You gotta have this kit for your party. Wear the pants of enduring victory, whatever it is. Trousers probably is what they would call it. And then, of course, here's the exact strategy and spells you need and the level of said spells. I don't like this. I love Baldur's Gate 3, but I play it like an absolute pleb. I'm vanilla. Just give me the out. And after enough surfing of the internets, I found my out. This absolute dreadlord on Reddit had a simple solution: polymorph. Some of you might be nodding your heads now because you know the power of polymorph, which is it's OP, it's overpowered. For the non-initiated, polymorph is when you turn a creature, typically a humanoid, into another creature, typically a farm animal. In the case of BG3, polymorph turns the target into a sheep. By the way, sheep is singular and plural. Had to Google that one. And if you're wondering, I was playing an Oathbreaker Paladin. Again, I'm a pleb, I know it. So armed with knowledge, I get my party all set up. I have my wizard ready to go. And the strategy says you gotta polymorph Balthazar into a sheep. And then, because you're fighting in this abyssal realm where the time and space are irrelevant, you need to kick him off of this ledge into the abyss. I love this idea. So, before Balthazar even starts talking, boom! Polymorph. He gets sheeped. It took a couple tries because he resisted, but I get him. And then I did it. I kicked him off the cliff before he was able to break the spell. And that was it. I did 2 actions the whole fight. Polymorph, kick. That was it. It's one of my favorite moments in BG3 because it was unfiltered creativity. And it got me thinking about writing and its reliance on innovative solutions to problems, whether that be a problem the character needs to solve, a plot hole you need to solve that, let's admit it, you wrote yourself into, and you're in good company, by the way. And that creativity and innovation, how we utilize that, weaponize it to dig ourselves out of these holes. So I'd like to, today in this tap out, make the case for why writers should play D&D, Dungeons and Dragons. I can't say BG3 and D&D are the same thing for legal reasons. Allegedly, maybe I need to throw that in there for the algorithm. Wizards of the Coast, who owns Dungeons and Dragons, is notoriously litigious, so here I am hedging all of my bets. But I'd like to make the case that writers should play Dungeons and Dragons. But before we do that, For the uninitiated, what is D&D? What is Dungeons and Dragons? And I'll be using, if it's at all relevant, and again, to demonstrate my plebeiness, the 5e version, the 5th edition of D&D. The short version is that D&D, like writing, is theater of the mind. What do I mean by that? It's a collection of people, typically 3 or more, who gather at a table. There's almost always alcohol involved if you're doing it right. And you've brought a number of things. You've brought a character sheet. Sometimes people do these using apps or programs on their laptop. And that character sheet has all the stats for the character you've chosen according to the lore, the canon of D&D. So you've decided your race. I almost always use Drow, Dark Elf, because I'm an edgelord. And you choose your class. I, like the nefarious Balthazar, am a necromancer, which means I chose the wizard class and the sub-discipline there being necromancer. Though I still like to try wild magic. That just sounds great. The chaos there, what potential, right? And then you choose other things like the armor, the weapons, the starting gear, if you will. And armed with this knowledge and your character sheet, you sit at this table with dice. Why do you need dice? Well, because there is a DM at the table with you. And by the way, if you're interested, there's a ton of ways to play D&D online. It's actually works quite well. There's a DM at the table. This DM is the dungeon master. The DM represents the narrative of the quest you're going to go on, whether it's a short one-shot quest you played in one session or could span, in some cases, years. I've seen a video where there is a group of guys who've been playing the same D&D campaign for, it's either 20 or 40 years. Either way, that's amazing. But the D&D is the storyteller. They are the voice of the characters and enemies and everything you'll interact with. And they're also playing the role of fate, because you decide at certain points to do certain things, and they might require a skill check. You'll need to roll your dice to see if that lock you're trying to pick is successful. And the dice are like a physical manifestation of fate. Are you successful in this thing? Even though you might be highly competent, accidents happen. You roll your d20, your dice. It has 20 sides to it, unsurprisingly. And, you needed at least a 12 to unlock this. You rolled a 1, a crit fail, as they say. You not only fail at picking the lock, but your tools get jammed in it. That lock is beyond pickery. And the point is to go through the life of this character, the quest that this character, along with the people you're collaborating with, you go through this quest and you take on who this character is. You role play. A lot of people will speak with either the accent or gravitas or tone, you name it, of their character, because the amount of volition and agency you have is the same you would have in real life, assuming you could get away with something like murder hobo, which is just crimes against humanity. And in this theater of the mind, where a DM typically has created this story, this quest that you're going to go on, you get to visualize things. Sometimes there are visual representations. Great DMs will create tabletop models of castles or fields you're fighting on, you name it. And you negotiate this world, from combat to dialogue to romance to familial squabbles that have been carried forth by dwarven grudges for centuries. And it's a ton of fun. D&D is a great exercise in creativity. Specifically improv, because oftentimes if you've got a pretty hardcore Souls-like DM, they'll give you only a limited amount of time to make a decision. You messed up that lockpick, guard heard that odd sound is on their way. What do? Turn over the hourglass, or maybe the 30-second glass, and you better act. I hope you got your D20 ready. All this is to say it goes hand in hand with writing, with creating, if we wanted to think about it, a world. Because you, the author in your story, I think of myself as a DM, a dungeon master. I've created this world. There's a host of things that inhabit it. And my characters are the players. They're the people at the table with their character sheets, making decisions. Now, I plan on doing a future tap out on this, but I call it, for now at least, it's my WIP, work in progress, the coffee test. In other words, if my characters are players improvising in the moment, if I know them well enough, that I present a problem or any kind of situation, I should know how they respond so well that at that point as a writer, I become the glorified transcriptionist. I'm just transcribing what they decide to do. That's something I'll go into more in the future, but for now, assuming you know your characters well enough, they have all the agency and volition they'll need. So you as DM just have to propose these issues and see how they respond. So that's the through line. I think that's, if you will, the connective tissue between writing and Dungeons and Dragons. You are the DM and your characters are the players. And if you're going to have the same kind of fun and immersion, and if you want your readers to experience that same sort of thing, the drama, the closure or lack thereof in some cases, I've come up with 3 I's that I think D&D has that, again, we could change out, substitute D&D with writing and have it be apropos. Here are my 3 I's of D&D. The first is improvisation, improv. We already talked about that. The lockpick jams, what do you do? And how your characters improvise in your stories, again, I think is a function of knowing them so well that if they went to a cafe, you wouldn't have to wonder at how they order their coffee. For example, one of my characters, I know for a fact, he would order coffee even though it doesn't exist in the time period I'm writing. He'd order coffee in a glass mug that was see-through, so that as he poured cream into it, he doesn't like sugar, just creamer, he could watch the interplay as the coffee and the creamer mix. So assuming I know my characters well enough, the improv comes naturally. And as you go through subsequent drafts of a story, I'm sure you've seen this. So that's the first I, is improv. The second is innovation. D&D players are innovative people. When you've sat down at a table with someone who has been playing the game so long that they're probably more fluent in its experience than in real life, which take from that what you will, you know it when you see it. Now, I don't think I'm the most innovative person, but I think I'm creative enough that I can tack some of that onto innovation. Here is an example. I typically play as a necromancer. Necromancers are, air quotes, squishy. They don't have a lot of health. They have low AP, low armor points. And you can use mage armor, that helps a little bit, but not by much. So when a wizard gets hit, they typically get hit real hard, especially physical damage. So I came up with a strategy. I call them my meat shields, though that doesn't apply entirely. And here's why. My 2 servants, when you start out as a necromancer, eventually you're able to summon 2 people, 2 humanoids. So I always choose 2 different types. One, I reanimate a skeleton, typically humanoid, as well as a zombie. So it's got all the gooey, fleshy bits. And they act as my meat shields. Like I said, that's only partially apropos. And they act as linebackers. They run D for me. And then they also double because I realized, hey, this is only half the equation. I need to innovate. I'm going to get creative here. And I did something. I bought a small cask of gunpowder. And I didn't tell my DM ahead of time that I was going to do this because I really wanted to see how he reacted. And I was lucky in that. My DM, fantastic guy, incredibly innovative, actually, himself, and interesting, and just rolls with the punches. Great sense of humor, which I would argue you're required to have for a game of D&D. And so I jammed that cask of gunpowder into the zombie's chest. It's gooey, just went right in there. And then I commanded him to go after an enemy that was coming after me, and then tackle him. And tackling in 5e doesn't work great, but it's better than, from what I understand, 3e, which was so complicated that they just rendered it down to its most constituent atoms. So tackling an enemy, I then launch a fireball at my zombie. Theoretically, if I roll my dice well and fate agrees and allows me to do this nonsense, it will detonate the gunpowder. The zombie explodes. The explosion itself causes damage. The shrapnel causes damage. And the decaying flesh in the wounds, in my enemy's wounds, causes a different kind of damage. Like maybe it's necrotic or poison, toxic, whatever. And my DM loved this. He thought it was hilarious. We had a bunch of fun with it. Wouldn't be the last time I did it. So that's an example of innovation. And I've taken that same innovation and used it in my storytelling. Not that exact example, but I'm sure it'll show up someday in something I write. The third I in my 3 is idiocy. Improv, innovation, but most important, idiocy. Anybody who's played enough D&D will tell you it almost always collapses on its face, almost like that saying no plan survives contact with the enemy. The idiocy that is birthed from the circumstances, the situation in a D&D game tend to be people's favorite parts. It's the failure, right? Because idiocy is typically a result of failure. The idiocy of failing a skill check to jump over a puddle, fall into the puddle, realize it's actually a portal to another dimension, and from there, the DM probably on the spot is improving all of that. The idiocy that results in this portal fantasy you've suddenly found yourself in can be a ton of fun. The idiocy that comes from a drinking game you suddenly decided everybody in the bar needed to be a part of, ton of fun. If necessity is the mother of all invention, I would argue idiocy is the father of subversion. And before I move on, this is a core element of writing, which is being okay with making mistakes and seeing where they take you. We're so often convinced everything needs to make perfect sense, and so often proven wrong when, especially if you're trying to write a realistic character or making realistic world building, it's the mistakes that tend to birth the most compelling stories. And I'll go on to detail that for you in a little bit. But if idiocy is the father of subversion, then that is inextricably tied to a saying I love. It's only 2 words, but it may be 2 of the most powerful words, I think, for what makes great storytelling, which is fail forward. Fail forward. Being okay, getting out of your comfort zone, really. Being okay with the whims of the characters. Because if, again, we are the DMs of our stories, and we know these characters so well, they are autonomous, they've achieved sentience, they are now self-aware, then we need to be okay with the fact that they are going to hijack the story. And we need to experience the defeat of our expectations, the subversion. And sometimes this is birthed by idiocy. It's realism, because how often does your day go according to plan? Maybe 80%, but most of us experience, maybe even on an hour-to-hour basis, the subversion of expectations, whether that's minor or major, sometimes comical, sometimes tragic. And the defeat leads us to new places, whether that's physically, emotionally, spiritually, you name it. Because how much fun is a video game without a boss or some kind of challenge? This gives us real characters. It gives us real storytelling, whether we're talking about D&D or our own story writing. So when I talk about realism, subversion, innovation, improvising, here's a real life example, or at least a fictional example in a sense. I have a current novel I'm working on, which I promise someday will actually come out. There is a plan that needs to take place. It's sort of an Ocean's 11-esque vibe to it. And it was riddled with holes, logic problems. It is a bad plan. It speaks to the desperation of the characters, and so half-cocked and underbaked that any sane person I propose this plan to would tell me, "You're out of your mind. This is a terrible idea, Sam. Let me tell you what I would do." But what to do in that situation? The logic dictates fix the problem, make it make sense. And to a certain degree, I did that. But I realized at a certain point, unless I wanted to do another rewrite, which I couldn't do it. I was going to go mildly insane at that point. Unless I wanted to do another rewrite, I was just going to have to stick with the flaws, the idiocy in this plan that I had concocted, that my characters had helped me devise. And I decided, like in any good D&D campaign, that the mistake was the opportunity. I had failed, and now I could either choose to rewrite or fail forward. So I chose the latter. My characters acknowledged the plan is trash. It's a bad idea. They're in a hyper-emotional state resulting from a devastating loss, and that, like in real life, they're not thinking clearly, because I want realistic characters. And let's be honest, people don't make a whole lot of sense. We're nonsensical at times. Even the most rational person can become outlandish in regards to problem solving. So I just rolled with it. These are more realistic characters, I realized. They're openly acknowledging that love, for example, is clouding reality, clouding sense, obfuscating any kind of reason. And it immediately improved things. I found out, just like I have in countless D&D games, leaning into the suck was the best thing I could do. Failing forward drastically improved the plan. It legitimized it in a sense. It needed legitimacy, and it couldn't get that through reason. And so it gets it through unreason. And I think it works. Do things turn out well for this plucky band of characters? Maybe someday you'll actually find out. But it was so liberating to accept the flaws, to improvise, to let the idiocy of my piss poor planning birth something that now I think works, because I acknowledge, almost like a fourth wall breaking thing, I acknowledge to the reader, yeah, I know this is trash, but this is the best we can do. Because let's be honest, most people are just making do with what they have, and that may not be all that much. And they too have to acknowledge, even if it's subconsciously, their plans are trash. Now, I don't recommend you do this with every single, maybe complex plan you have going on. If you've got a romance arc, it's perfectly fine for people in love to behave irrationally. But if you have something like hard sci-fi, a Neil Stephenson-esque story that is relying heavily on science and practicality, and typically, not always, hard sci-fi isn't always this way, but typically doesn't rely on strong characterization, I don't know that this failing forward idea, in the sense I've described it at least, is for you. But it is so liberating. Strong recommendation. So this is my case for why writers should play D&D. It helps you improvise. You become more innovative. I don't know, is that a UK English thing there? And then it legitimizes the idiocy and allows you to see the potential in subversion that resulted from said idiocy. Give it a shot. Get together with some friends, especially if they're all writer friends. You're probably going to have a great campaign, and see if somebody's willing to take on the job of D&D. It can be a full-time job. If you've got a great DM already, send them a box of chocolates. They are a godsend. But give it a shot. See how your writing can benefit from Dungeons and Dragons. Or you can just kick a sheep off a cliff.